With us now is Dr. Scott Bay, and it's 1T. That's what I'm going to call him, 1T Scott. Welcome to the show, Doctor. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, Donna.
I had fun talking to you. So you live down in Georgia, but you grew up here in Long Island.
I did. I'm originally from Massapequa.
And one of the things that we were talking about is the distinction between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So can you explain to us a little bit of the difference?
Exactly. So a psychiatrist is an MD, went to medical school just like a primary care doctor, internal medicine, OBGYN, surgeon, pediatrician, whereas a psychologist is a PhD doctor.
Okay.
And a psychologist does therapy, counseling, psychological testing to clarify diagnosis, whereas a psychiatrist, as a physician, diagnoses and treats mental illness, including prescribing medication.
The suicide rate, I believe, is off the charts. Now, I don't know if it's just because I'm more aware of it or if it is becoming an epidemic. You know, PTSD, all these different causes of these things. People are in real crisis. When is it time? Like, what's a warning sign when people know that they need to come and get help?
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. First of all, I just want to expound on what you mentioned. The suicide rates in the civilian population are markedly elevated. And I also want to mention that it's very sad that the suicide rates in our military population, both current active service and retired military, is many times higher than that.
Okay.
Right. So some of the typical warning signs that people may have severe depression and may be at risk for suicide, if they're preoccupied with feelings of guilt and shame excessively and intensely. Also, if they're having signs of extreme excessive anxiety or agitation or anger or mood swings, such as feeling very, very happy at some times and extremely sad at other times, and rapid shifts in mood.
Okay.
If they're withdrawing from family and friends, if they're having marked sleep and appetite disturbances, either sleeping much more or less than normal, or they're eating much more or less than normal. And finally, if they're indulging in alcohol or drugs, these are potential worrisome signs. There are other more obvious ones, but those are just some that people should look out for. And above all else, people shouldn't be afraid to ask the person if they're having thoughts of not wanting to go on with life, and how can they be of help to them. And one of the most common myths is that if you bring this up to someone who may be suicidal, you'll give them that thought. And the opposite is true. Someone who's in that state of mind is very glad to be able to talk about it. So it's actually always good to ask the question, and you may save a life.
Well, even people that give things away, you know, if they're like, oh, I'm just downsizing, but you kind of know they're not downsizing, and they start giving away all their worldly possessions. They start detaching themselves from objects. I think that's also maybe a warning sign. Would you agree?
Exactly, okay. Yes. And sometimes even some very obvious things are missed, unfortunately, like things like looking into life insurance policies, wills, even investigating ways of committing suicide, looking into whether the life insurance policy will cover people after they take their life. I mean, tragically, Donna, things like that are missed and lives are lost as a result.
So when somebody comes to you, and we were talking about the fact that I had the joy of interviewing Kelsey Grammer from Frasier, right? When somebody comes to you, do you have them lay down on the sofa? Like, what's a typical visit like? How is it nowadays?
Right. Absolutely. Right? No, that's the stereotype of a bygone era where, you know, psychiatrists are doing psychoanalysis with couch and all that. Right. I don't have a couch in my office, just a love seat. Okay. And so no one lies down.
They just kind of lean.
If they choose to, or there's chairs to sit in as well. But really, it's like any other doctor's office, except we just sit and talk. There's no examining table. There's no blood pressure cuff and all that type of thing. So we just sit and talk. I ask questions. I evaluate how people are feeling, ask them about the symptoms they're having, and through taking a very careful and thorough and comprehensive history of their symptoms, their medical problems, their family history, their personal background, I come up with a diagnosis and formulate a treatment plan. It's my job to help someone feel better. Yes. They're coming to see me, they're not feeling well mentally and emotionally, and so it's my job to figure out what is wrong and how can I help them feel better.
I love that about you. We talked about that and how much you care about people. We have just a couple of questions that you said that you would talk about because you have this new radio show, BBM Global Network, that you're going to be doing. And so one of the typical questions, this one, so my 10-year-old son is having problems in school and his grades aren't so good. And he's having behavioral problems. What should they do? What's a good first step for that parent?
Right. Well, so this question comes up a lot. And when I tell parents of children and adolescents, when they're having problems like this, you have to look at all the different possibilities of what may be going on. And look at the various parameters of a child's behavior, their grades, their academic performance, what's their behavior in the classroom, are they having behavior problems at home, how are they interacting with their peers. So in order to evaluate what may be going on, a good thorough evaluation with the pediatrician to make sure there isn't some sort of physical medical problem. They may need a thorough battery of psychodiagnostic testing to look at, do they have a learning disability? Do they have an attention or sensory processing problem? And then also, are there problems going on in their home life? Has there been a big change or transition in their home life? Right. Even something as a move, a loss of a beloved aunt or uncle or grandparent, a new arrival, a new sibling, a loss of a pet, anything that may be going on in their personal life that can affect all these things that are going on at school and at home.
Okay, so if this was the situation that happened, this was the challenging moment, what led up to that explosion?
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Another quick one. Things in the news are really kind of bleak, which is one of the reasons I started my show. Live It Up and the Donna Drake Show is all about celebrating the essence of happiness. This person's feeling very angry and anxious at work. What could they do to kind of de-stress? A quick tip for them.
Right. Well, so the news is very distressing and causes a lot of stress, and people are getting very anxious and upset. There's a lot of conflict. And so one person called on my show and they were telling me this is going on in their life and it's bleeding into work because they're actually playing the radio with the news on in their workplace. So I think in general, exactly, right. So that obvious solution, shut it off. And, you know, that person was the supervisor, so they had the freedom to do that. But I think in general, people need to stop all the sources of the negative information that's coming to the news. People are having it go right into their phone, all their feeds on social media. They're watching too much of it on TV. They're looking at too much of it on the internet. So I advocate the way to alleviate this stress is to cut down on your exposure to these things.
Be mindful about
right.
it.
Right, not to the point where you cut yourself off from it, but just limit your
Get
exposure
the headlines,
to it.
Be knowledgeable, but you know, you don't have to be like inundated with it.
Not immersed into it, yes.
Okay, and our final question is, I have a lot of anxiety. My doctor is giving me, I'm going to just go with the generic word of alprazolam. Is that right? For it. Is that okay for people to take? Or should they watch the warning signs about this particular?
Right, exactly. Well, lately in the media, Donna, the opioid epidemic is
terrible.
getting a great deal of attention, right? So narcotic painkillers, all of the abuse of them, all the disability and death and devastation they're causing. Well, there's another hidden drug epidemic of prescription drugs behind the opioid epidemic. It's benzodiazepines.
Okay.
Now, those are sedatives, things like alprazolam and diazepam and lots of other sedatives and sleeping pills. And they're just as addictive, just as devastating in their effects. So no, the answer to that question, drugs like that are not safe to take. There are better, safer ways of dealing with anxiety, medication-wise and non-medication-wise.
Lavender, spraying lavender on your pillow.
Right, so if you're into essential oils, that's the one that most people find very helpful with anxiety. But in my practice, I really work on safety issues. If people are going to be on medication, it needs to be safe medication, being mindful of avoiding dangerous addictive drugs that cause more problems than people already have, and also being mindful in general of medication side effects, managing and mitigating those risks and effects, and making sure they help people feel better.
So I know, Dr. Scott, you've been speaking all over the globe, and if somebody wanted to reach out to have you be a special speaker, they could reach out to you on your website as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you so
enjoyed this.
much,
Did you
Donna.
have fun?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm really happy because I know that we're going to be saving a lot of lives together just by awareness. And, you know, PTSD and so many other things, people are really, like I said, in crisis. So let's get that suicide rate down.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Please stay tuned for more. We've been visiting with Dr. Scott Bay.